The winners of the World Cup semi-finals, of course, qualify for the final of the tournament, but the finalists also qualify automatically for the Candidates Tournament to be played next spring to determine the challenger for world champion Magnus Carlsen. This is the big prize. So the semi-finals of the World Cup actually assume a greater importance than the actual final itself. Now, both matches ended 1-1 after the classical games, so both matches went into tie breaks. They were suitably tense, suitably dramatic. First of all, let's take a look at the match between Liren-So and Ding Liren. First of these 25-minute games, Liren-So was white. He made a bit of a hash of the opening. Ding won a pawn, and well, he reached this endgame where you can see Ding has this advanced pawn on c3, his extra pawn. It's looking very good for him. He wants to play rook c4 and slowly come in with rook and bishop. So Wesley tried knight a3, so that means the pawn advances, but of course the knight is hassling the bishop. Ding returns the pawn with bishop d3, but now you can see this knight is trapped at the side of the board, and this should be a winning position for black. You can see this knight is absolutely terrible. Now Ding plays very well, opening up the other side of the board. He can't break through on the queen side for the moment, but this is superb play from the Chinese player. Just fixing a weakness here. So the rook is looking here, and he's ready to open up the position as well. G takes f4, and now short of time, Ding automatically recaptured on f4. But he could have already just played rook takes pawn, which would have crowned his strategy. And now, for example, if pawn takes pawn, rook check, the king is on the back rank. I mean, this is completely winning for black. Or if knight takes pawn, check, and pawn takes pawn, and again with the king on the back rank, and still terrible pins here. Black must be winning that. Instead, Ding recaptured, and now somehow, incredibly, Wesley, through some extraordinary defense, managed to play his way out of trouble. It still looks really difficult, but here Wesley was over the worst. You can see that even black's king can sometimes be in trouble. The knight is active, and Wesley just about managed to scrape a draw. So they went into, well, the next game, and Ding was so shocked by blowing that game that he agreed a draw after just 9 moves in the second 25-minute game. So they went into 2 10-minute games, and this was the first of them. So Ding with the black pieces, and he's played a very interesting game actually. And here he might be a pawn down. You can see Wesley has an extra pawn, 4 against 3. But compare all the pieces. Ding's pieces are all really active. This pawn is blockaded, making this bishop a terrible piece. And crucially, just compare the position of the two kings. Ding's king has 3 pawns covering, so very secure, whereas Wesley's king has just 2 pawns covering and no pieces around the king. So although Wesley is a pawn up here, this is a really lovely position for black to play. And now the attack started on white's king. It's very hard for white to defend this. I think even with a greater amount of time, I think this would be extremely difficult. And Ding's pieces crawled in here. It's really, really nasty. check, and the queen takes up this fantastic position here, so rook to the second is threatened. Wesley can just try and fight off this queen with his own queen, but it's all in vain. Now the pawn in the middle drops, and it's this weak second rank which is the undoing of white in this position. So now if queen f2, then the rook will come down, and that's ultimately fatal. So the king goes in the corner, queen d5. Now, however white gets out of this check, it's really all over. For example, queen f3, you can give a check, and queen e6 is a really nasty move, threatening the pawn here and a checkmate here. If king g1, then rook c2 is also dreadful. Wesley tried rook f3, and now this is such a nasty pin. Here actually the best way to kill all counterplay would be just to play rook a3, stopping that a pawn rolling, but well, queen c6 is also a very nasty move because white's queen is for the chop. Ding didn't take the queen straight away. He was trying to keep his extra pawn on the king side, but well, he went for it now. Of course, if king h3, then queen d7 is fatal, so the king has to come back, and rook c1 wins the queen. Now there's still a little bit of work to do, but Ding managed to get down to queen versus rook and win that game. So Ding just had to draw the next game, which he managed to do without any difficulty at all. So Ding Liren goes through to the final, and Wesley goes out. I mean, I was surprised about that, but Wesley seemed to lack some sparkle in this tiebreak. And well, fantastic for Ding, who is only 24 years old. He's already 3-time Chinese champion. Incredible record. His rating at the moment, 2771. He's been on the scene for some time now, incredibly experienced. He's gold medal winner for the Chinese team in Tromsø in 2014. He's a very exciting player, so I think he'll be a fantastic addition to the candidates tournament, and the first Chinese player to qualify for the candidates tournament, so I wish him well. Now, the second semi-final tiebreak between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Liren-So. This was an extraordinary match. So the first 25-minute game, Aronian repeated the line of the Spanish from the classical games, but Maxime got it right this time, and well, here has a nice position. He started a pawn storm on the king side with g4, excellent move, stopping black, for example, playing h5 or even an f5 later. And I'm going to go on another 20 moves. There was a lot of manoeuvring, and well, but it's very hard for black to get any kind of counterplay here. So after 20 more moves, Aronian very passive, and you can see that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave has managed to advance this wonderful phalanx of pawns up the board. And here Aronian tried to break out with d5, but after f6 you can see this bishop is terribly passive. Now I'm going to advance another 20 moves to this position where Maxime has managed to gain control of the e-file. He's got to be a little bit careful because his king is a bit exposed, but with the queen and rook covering, then this should be a winning position. He started the winning process with rook e7. Aronian can only wait here. King h3, there's a tricky move. Now if the king goes to the back, here's a nice idea. Rook check, and now you give up the rook. Queen e8 check and queen f8, followed by a checkmate. Aronian tried queen c8. Looks a bit tricky, but here was a lovely winning move. Queen e6, exploiting this pin. And if rook takes rook, we take black's queen. So that meant that Vachier-Lagrave went one up. So he just needed to draw the next game. With black, of course. So Aronian in a must-win situation in the second 25-minute game. But watch what happened. So, well, I found it incredible that Maxime would play something as sharp as this. They're going into a kind of Benoni when he only needed a draw. I would have expected Maxime to play, you know, more solidly, maybe a Slav or something. But this is incredibly tense. Aronian has form with this particular opening variation. I think it's a good choice from him because, you know, white is pretty solid, has a wonderful pawn chain, but he also manages to get attacking chances on black's king. I think this is an excellent practical move, trading off the dangerous dark squared bishop. And here, well, this position has been reached before, and the knight can, of course, just return to e2, and, well, it's still a double-edged position. But Aronian, after just 1 second thought, played bishop c4, an incredible sacrifice. Now, this means that if the knight gets back to e2, then white has gained a lot of time. He hasn't. His development is very clear with the bishop, this lovely bishop on c4. So Maxime really should take this piece, but now, well, you can see the h file is open, queen h6 is threatened, so rook h8, and, well, Aronian plays with such incredible freedom here. Throws another pawn into the pot with e5. Remember, he's already a piece down, so if this is taken, then d6, and suddenly this is all over. The knight comes into d5, an incredible initiative white has. So after e5, Maxime played queen e7 and then castles queenside. It's rare that you see the king going to the queenside in this kind of position. If the queen takes the pawn, then rook e1 followed by queen h6 is fatal, followed by rook e8. So knight d7. This was taken, and, well, queen takes. Now the knight comes in. d6 opens up bishop's diagonal. Well, I'm sure a computer could defend this well with black, but for poor old Maxime, the task was just too great, particularly when he has such little time on the clock. Rook e1, just starting to hassle the queen. In fact, the idea is to protect the knight and then play f4. And this didn't really affect white's plan here. f4, so the queen basically has to move off this diagonal, and this is fatal. For example, queen f5, queen c3 spells the end very soon. It went queen d4. So now the queen is attacked, the queen moved to the side, and now queen h5 was the end of the game. Queen f7 check threatened, and if rook f8, then rook h1, and a mate on the h file. Absolutely brilliant. A tour de force from Liren-Aronian, who with that victory equalised the scores after the first 2 classical games. Now the next 2 10-minute games weren't well, they were long, they were hard fought, but both ended in a draw. So they went into blitz games. The first of those blitz games, well, this was unbelievable. Levon played superbly in this first blitz game, 5-minute game. And here he built up a winning position. Maxim's pieces are so bad. And, you know, his king is just being ripped apart here. You can see these dart squares are so weak. At the moment, the rook covers the mate. But, I mean, this is just such a beautiful position for white. You know, black's pieces are so poorly placed. And I found it incredible that Maxim managed to hang on here. Here, I mean, the simplest move is just to play rook d8. And that just wins material. But remember, it's a blitz game. Incredible things can happen. And Levon was looking for a knockout blow, but you know, he wants to put his bishop here. But Maxim managed to thwart him at every turn. You know, this knight can exchange off the bishop on c3, and incredibly, Maxim manages to find a way of frustrating White's mating plans here. So now he just wants to trade queens. He's also threatening to take the rook. And at this moment, well, Aronian was shaking his head. He couldn't believe it that he'd messed things up so badly. In fact, he's still okay in this position. If he plays bishop c4, this is probably still a winning position. But okay, he's a rook down here. One doesn't play such moves in a blitz game. You just recapture pieces. And eventually, well, here actually black should be winning, but the game finally ended in a draw. Incredible. The next blitz game was also a draw. There were a few adventures there. So they then went into an Armageddon game. So Aronian won the toss and he chose the white pieces. That meant he had 5 minutes against Vachier-Lagrave's 4 minutes. But if the game were to be a draw, then Vachier-Lagrave would win. So Aronian with white with an extra minute, but in a must-win situation. Well, this was an incredible game. Here, I think Maxim is doing extremely well. He's got this A pawn here. Aronian has kept the tension, but in so doing allowed this pawn to advance down the board, and this must be absolutely fine for black. Now, of course, white can sort of hold the position by blockading this A pawn, but it's very hard to see how white can possibly win this position. I think, particularly after this pawn advances again, hard for black to break through, because this rook can't move away, because the A pawn can be taken. But how can white possibly win this? Particularly after this excellent move, bishop f8, exchanging off this bishop. And that allows black to bring his king into the game. So excellent pawn sacrifice from Vachier-Lagrave. Remember, this is a blitz game. One can't kind of analyse this and criticise the player's moves. I think both played extremely well given the situation. And this is a great move from Vachier-Lagrave, sacrificing a pawn to bring his king into the game. Now he chose king d5. King f5 was also a good option. And now the game just was completely crazy, with white pawns advancing down the middle of the board. I mean, probably Maxim went the wrong way with his king, and now he tried to put things right by bringing his king back towards the king side. But in the meantime, Levon has managed to bring his king to this very threatening position. But Vachier-Lagrave still is doing pretty well with his pawn here, preventing White's rook from entering the game. And this is the crunch moment, because Levon is threatening to push forward with f5, but Maxime found an excellent move, f6. This pawn is pinned. And now White's king is potentially in huge trouble. At this moment, I thought Maxime was home and dry. I thought he was going to draw this game. For example, if he simply takes the pawn on e5, he's absolutely fine. I think the game will result in a draw after this. But I think he saw glory and realised that White's king is in terrible trouble and thought this will be the easiest way to go. But the way Aronian played here, when it looks like he could even lose this position, was fantastic. Remember, it's a blitz game. They're playing almost instantly. f5, fantastic move. This is taken, and then e6. And here is perhaps the fatal moment, the fatal error. Black is still fine here. Maxime had to play rook a4. And after this, the game should still end in a draw. The pawn wants the queen, so this pawn has to be taken, and then king takes should end in a draw. But okay, a move like rook a4, very hard to find. Maxime played what looks like the most natural move, bringing the rook back to threaten a checkmate, but Levon has it under control. First of all, rook f1. That's forced. The rook's traded. And now rook takes pawn. Levon made this move instantly. And after this, one of these pawns has to go through to the queening square. And here, well, they reached an ending of queen against rook. But this was a simple matter of technique. It's not too difficult. I know there have been cases where black has managed to hold this, but they're rare. And in practice, it's simply very, very difficult to avoid losing that rook. I'm just going to show you the final position, because I think Levon's technique was very good. Rook h3. At some moment, the rook has to run away. And now watch what happens. Queen b6. And now the rook is lost. If the king comes here, then queen c4 check, forks, and king a2. This also forks king and rook. The rook comes here, and this wins the rook. Now, not queen takes rook, that's checkmate. That's one of the typical tricks, but queen a6 check forces mate on the next turn. So Liren-Aronian qualifies for the final, and of course the candidates tournament. An incredible achievement. I mean, this was the closest of matches, and you know, both players have been on superb form this year. And well, I hope that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave can still qualify for the candidates. He really deserves to be there. But well done to Liren-Aronian. So we have a final of the World Cup between Liren-Aronian and Ding Liren. But actually, the real prizes have been dished out. So Ding Liren and Liren-Aronian qualify for the candidates tournament.